What's going on? My script? I can show you. Huh?
Hello and welcome back to Scream Films, where we usually analyze movies and genres and discuss them a little bit. Today, I'm going to be discussing my most controversial film yet, Skinamarink. Skinamarink is directed by Kyle Ball and was shown at the Fantasia International Film Festival on July 25th, 2022, and had its theatrical release on January 13th, 2023, and was available to stream on Shudder on February 2nd that same year. It had a $15,000 budget and grossed $2.1 million in the box office. It has a 4.8 out of 10 stars on IMDb, a 72% Rotten Tomatoes score, and a 44% audience score. So you can tell this movie has mixed views already from the small budget and up to the reviews. For those that don't understand why this movie has such mixed feelings, let me explain it for you. A lot of hate that's towards this movie is honestly just what's being shown and what's in the movie. So this is an experimental film. Experimental films try to do something different than other filmmakers try to do. It's often opposed to the practices of mainstream commercials and documentary filmmaking. As always, if you do somehow find this movie interesting, please don't just use my video on it, go ahead and watch it. It's free to be streamed on Shudder. I'm not being sponsored by Shudder, but you can get a 7-day free trial and then you'd have to pay for it. So within those 7 days, you can watch Skinamarink and other movies that are there. I would highly recommend it. So as I was discussing, this movie is an experimental film. It's purposely trying to be different. And a lot of people who watch this movie didn't either realize that it was an experimental film or just didn't like the concept and what was shown in the movie. What about the other people who maybe liked it or don't like it? What were their issues with it? Well, let's go ahead and just get started off as usual with the cinematography. The easiest way to explain the cinematography is that it's just minimal. Pretty much as minimal can get. What do I mean by that? Well, let me explain. A lot of these shots are pretty much at a low angle on a tripod. Very simple, but always effective. The camera is put in specific spots to make the camera feel like it's pondering around the house, like the TV, the couch, or even like the stairs, or on just random walls in the house. It's also giving the audience the feel of an analog horror vibe, which is kind of the point. It also helps build up some tension that needs to be in the film. An example of that is whenever the entity is kind of moving things around, you see low angle shots of the entity kind of moving things slowly, and that next shot is showing what the entity just did with those objects. You're seeing it kind of quickly and not getting lazy drag out tension. I will admit that it's not the scariest thing, but it helps the audience know that this entity is kind of messing with the children and kind of toying with them. It's a good touch. Some of my favorite shots in this film is actually when the windows and doors appear and disappear, kind of letting the audience know that they used to be there and the children are a little concerned of what's happening and they don't really know what's happening. It also is letting the audience know already that they're being toyed with by something supernatural and something that they don't know of. The camera being at a low angle helps us kind of feel like children again and makes us kind of feel hopeless. It also does help that the main characters are children. So for those that don't really know, when you do a low angle and you have someone that looks taller, it's kind of giving them the dominant position in the scene. So it's also giving the entity more power over the children as well. And then we also do get some POV shots from mostly Kaylee and then eventually Kevin at the end, where we do feel like that hopeless child again, wandering in the dark at night. And then the most famous shot of that is when Kaylee's going to her parents' bedroom. We're in her shoes as she goes to see her dad on the side of the bed, and he tells her to look underneath the bed. We're getting that not wanting to do it, but does it anyways, of looking down, back up, and then doing a small whip pan to see that the mother's on the other side of the bed. This scene is really good at adding tension, as I was saying, saying, but it doesn't really deliver it. It kind of takes a tad bit too long for that, but it's a really good red herring to keep the audience kind of worried about what might happen. The shots being in these different weird angles helps with the ideology of this being an experimental film, but they're very odd and intriguing. So overall, the cinematography is, from an unbiased standpoint, this can be really confusing if you don't really understand the context of the film. It helps with most people who are really into films. They really enjoy this because it's really different and weird, where we usually get close-ups of, like, say the children, we get close-ups of them in a standard movie and we follow them in a third-person view, while this is not doing that and it's kind of hiding the fact that we don't really need to see them, we just need to feel the energy of what's happening in the atmosphere. So as well with these camera shots, they make you kind of listen to sound. So let's just go ahead and get to sound. The sound in this movie is mostly the bread and butter of this film. Since the movie takes place in the mid-90s, you kind of hear that old school film crackle and pop that happens, usually, and you hear that throughout the film. This generally helps sell the camera to being a old school 35mm or an 8mm supernatural camera. Almost the entire film is mostly silent, except for some of the major plot points that are happening. The sound of the TV is often heard as well in the background to kind of make the kids feel that they're in a safe haven. And you can also hear it in the background while the camera's in a different place of the house, kind of letting you know that you can hear the TV throughout the house, and it kind of gives that lingering, creepy vibe. I will admit, it is hard to hear some of the dialogue at sometimes, but the movie kind of makes up for it in having subtitles there so you can understand what's happening, since the majority of the time it's just kids talking, except for the entity when he speaks. But you're getting that clear note of it's supposed to be hard to hear, but let us help you with it. The sound also helps make the audience feel that they're in an empty house at the middle of the night, where you're all alone and you're just kind of doing your thing, but maybe something throughout the house is also hearing you. When the windows and doors kind of disappear, they do this weird unearthly sound that kind of help make the fact that this is not supposed to be happening, but it's happening, and it feels unnatural and supernatural. An interesting that I found out when researching this film is that Kyle Ball, the director, has kind of openly said how the sound is done. Apparently when Kyle was interviewed by IndieWire, he said, and I quote, "I had my set filter for making audio generically sound old. Originally, it was like 3 or 4 filters that I designed on my own. There was one reverb and then a bunch of other ones." Close quote. This was in combination of the old filters of the movie to kind of make the audio sound like that it was super old school 35mm, 8mm, like we were discussing already. But the fact that he was kind of toying with it is kind of proving that this is experimental and that he tried one thing and didn't like it. After he didn't like it, he just simplified it. He simplified the number of audio filters he placed over every sound and built specific audio tracks to manipulate movement by movement for the scariest sound. For those that don't know what that means or have ever been in an editing software, you have different audio tracks that you can put in, and you can have basically an infinite number. I think the most that I've seen accidentally on my own projects is like 40, but that was also an accident. But you can add different layers of audio in the storyline, and you can manipulate that for it to kind of work together. I use that in making Call of Duty Zombies work in film, especially with that skit. I added a lot of different sounds, like the zombie sounds and everything. I kind of added it all together and kind of made it manipulate like they were all there. So that's an example of using different audio tracks and getting them all to sound like one whole thing. But the simplicity of the sound works better in the final cut. I feel like if he did use that bigger one, it might have worked, but it also kind of might have been a little bit too much for an experimental film. The dialogue definitely sounds like it's coming through an old microphone system, like in like the late 50s talk shows or that kind of old stuff. It kind of just feels like it was definitely an add-on so you can hear it, and it sounds really well. But like whenever something big happens, like it makes sure that you hear it correctly and you hear it loud and clear. It also makes sense as well for it to be really loud, since this is the middle of the night. Usually the sound that happens is usually quick and loud, but in the middle of the night, whenever no one's doing anything, it's just exceedingly loud. Almost all the sound in the film was recorded either offset in production or just during post-production. An example of this is basically all the dialogue lines were recorded offset using an ADR. This is also known as dubbing. ADR stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement. Usually this happens whenever the audio doesn't sound good and they're in the editing stage, and they'll just get the actor to redo their lines so it sounds clear to the audience whenever it's being shown. A lot of this is mostly used for action scenes for grunts. An example of that is with Logan. Whenever at the finale, when he's running around the forest, killing all the goons, they filmed all of his grunts afterwards. And there's actually a video of it. I'll make sure to have it. But it's him just watching himself act and then him adding in the grunts like he would have used to kind of get that extra realism for the film to make it sound like you can hear his grunting and him kind of struggling with his age. But in Skinamarink, since we don't really see their faces, this is like the easiest thing to do, so you don't have to have the kids really act with their whole body, you just need their voice. And it also helps the kid actors kind of read lines easier, so they don't have to trust on the child's ability to remember a line where they could probably just have a script in their hand or something and just have them record it. Although I don't know if that's true with this film, I think it would just be the easiest way to do it. So overall, the sound is one of the more important things in this movie. Since the cinematography is minimal, the sound kind of picks up those pieces that usually are in cinematography, and it kind of helps the audience know what's happening in the movie. The quietness of some of the movie helps represent how alone these kids are in this house, and it's really solid. I will admit it does have some of its flaws. Sometimes it is hard to hear something, kind of the dialogue mostly, where you're trying to pay attention and it kind of slips past you. Especially if you're watching like this on a TV, it is really hard to hear some things, but like if you have like a headset on or like an earbud in, it's easier to hear that. I also didn't watch this in theaters for my first time, so I can't really say anything about how it sounded in theaters. If you saw it in theaters, please let me know. Tell me what it was like to hear the audio in the movie. I'd be really interested to know. But as well, the humming for the old camera, if you know how like where to listen to for the sound for that, you can actually hear it loop, and it kind of takes you out for a second if you once you hear it and you're like, oh, this is just something that they did in post-production. Since the cinematography is minimal, the sound helps the audience know what's happening in the moment. The quietness of the movie somewhat helps represent the emptiness of the house and that the kids are alone, and it's pretty solid. I will admit it does have its flaws. Sometimes it's hard to hear specific sounds, especially if you're watching it on a TV. I didn't watch this in theaters when it came out, so I don't really have a bias on how it is in the theater. I'm pretty sure since theaters have good sound systems, it should have been fine. But if you did watch it in theaters, let me know, tell me how it sounded. The humming represents the old style of audio loops that happen in older film cameras. The humming of the old audio works, but since it loops and sometimes if you hear it right and you hear it restart the loop, it kind of starts getting annoying with it because you're already hearing it and it kind of covers everything. So overall, the sound is really good in this film. Although I did say that the sound is the bread and butter of the film, there is something else that also is the bread and butter of the film, and that would be the lighting. This section for lighting is going to be the second to smallest portion of this video, mostly because this movie is just simply dark. The house is mostly set in darkness, except for some things like the flashlights, the nightlight, and the glow of the television. Whenever the lights are on, it helps the audience know that the children feel safe. That's why, you know, the TV is one of the most important part of the film, is because it makes the children feel like they're in a safe haven whenever they're, you know, not. It also keeps the entity away from them mostly, and then that's mainly when the entity attacks is when they're in the dark. So with the TV being on, it also helps distract them as children, but also lets the audience know that they have a boundary to keep the entity away. The darkness can rekindle the fear of not knowing what's in the dark when you were a child. That's the key to this movie, is that you don't know if there's actually going to be something in the dark wanting to scare you. It's just kind of focusing on the ideology that you might think that something's going to pop up any minute, but in reality, it's just tricking you to think that there's something going to happen. One of the main problems that people did have with this movie is that it was just too dark to watch, and people can't see what's happening. However, I do have a counter of making sure that you can see everything in the movie. Watch it at night, with the only device that you're watching it on being the only source of light in the house, and shut all your curtains and everything. It makes the movie 10 times better, it makes it scarier, it makes you feel alone in the dark, which is kind of the point of the movie. It just makes it scarier too, it just makes the movie scarier if you do it that way. So overall, the darkness of the film makes it scarier and darker tone. The house lights, including the TV, the night light, and the flashlights, all help the audience know that the children feel safe seeing what's in the dark, and it makes them more calm too, since they're children. And with all that summed up, basically, let's just go ahead and get into the acting. Since there aren't that many actors in this movie, this is going to be the quickest section to deal with. The acting in this movie overall is good. It's very impressive to see that these kid actors were able to kind of adapt to what they are, which is kids, and actually feel like children and siblings. They generally feel like real children instead of what usually cinema does with kids, in a way. That sounds a little weird. But they just feel like realistic children of kind of feeling hopeless and trusting each other as siblings to kind of surviving against the entity. With how they act and sound, they generally feel like kids in a very stressful situation trying to persevere with it. The actors who play the parents do very well. They generally feel like adults. And they also act really creepy whenever Kaylee is investigating their room. They generally feel creepy in how they speak, kind of softer tone, kind of whispering. It kind of feels scary. The actor who plays the dad does a very convincing role of portraying a possibly divorced dad in the situation, and he's playing it calm. Like with the phone, when he's on the phone, he generally feels calm, like everything's okay, don't worry about it. It feels real, and that letting the other parent or whoever else is on the phone know everything's fine, don't need to panic. It feels real. So overall, a big thumbs up on the acting. It was done very well, and with how many people were actually casted, it generally feels like a really good, realistic boundary of a house. They generally fit in their roles of the family, which works pretty well. Now, with pretty much everything else talked about, let's go ahead and talk about the most confusing part of this film, the story. Before I really begin with the story, I do want to bring up some things before I tell my version of the movie. For those that are super into analog horror, you should know that Kyle Ball actually does have a YouTube channel called Bite-Sized Nightmares, where he has uploaded a video called Heck. His channel and the video will be in the description below, so if you are interested, go ahead and watch that. It was the main inspiration of this film. If you've watched Heck, then you've definitely watched Skinamarink. It's basically the same thing where Heck is, I feel like, more of a story block for Skinamarink. It has basically the same ideology of a story of being afraid of the dark and not knowing what's in it. It has the same audio in a way, and then also kind of pushes towards those same cinematography bits of the camera being in random spots of the house. So it's a concept for Skinamarink. Easiest way to explain it. I will admit, it does feel like someone is expressing what they're afraid of. I don't remember where I saw it, but I do believe that Kyle was afraid of the dark when he was younger. I'm getting a lot of my information from bits and pieces, so be patient with me on that. This movie was filmed in Kyle's childhood home, so it definitely feels like someone is pulling out this old fear that he used to have and pulling it into reality, and he's kind of confronting his fear with it, which is interesting. The real meaning of the movie is one of the most difficult things to explain. What do I mean by that? Well, since it's analog horror, the story's kind of hidden, and there's a lot of theories that kind of go around the plot and what it really means. I would highly recommend watching Wendy Goon's video on Skinamarink if you are interested and don't really know what's happening in the story. Definitely watch that video. I kind of used it for some things with the story because I was kind of getting a little confused. The movie doesn't really express a lot of story, so if you are really into conspiracies and theories, definitely watch Wendy Goon's channel if you're somehow not subscribed. I will admit I am going to be taking some pinpoints from his video. I'm not going to be using all of them, but just some that kind of made sense to me to kind of express what the story feels like and whatnot. The first thing that really comes to mind is that the movie feels like a Hansel and Gretel story, except where the kids don't escape and they're stuck in the house. Kyle Ball really pulled a John Carpenter and knows what's happening in the movie but just won't express it, which makes the movie better, to be honest, because it makes people think about it. And instead of just a simple one-line answer to a specific thing, it makes the ideology of the movie different and kind of better because there is no real ending of what really happens, at least not that we know of. But it makes the movie more mysterious and kind of creepy in that same sort of way. Also, there's not much going on in story. It's mostly focused on the horror of darkness than the story, really. So now on to what goes down in the movie summarized, since it's a little confusing and again, there's not much really going on. Also, watch the movie too. I already brought it up in the beginning, but whatever I'm gonna say, spoilers as usual. So Kevin falls down the stairs. Dad vanishes from the house, leaving Kevin and Kaylee alone in the house. They decide to bunker down in the living room as their safe haven, where an entity is toying with them throughout, putting a chair on the ceiling when they least expect it, moving dolls and whatnot around, toys, the whole shebang. Eventually gets to the point where the entity is trying to convince Kaylee to do something, and she decides to go against it, and then she loses her face for it. Eventually, the entity starts toying with Kevin and trying to convince him to do stuff until Kevin decides he doesn't want to play with the entity. The entity forces Kevin to grab a knife and injure himself. Not really going into what happens because it happens to a child, and I don't think YouTube likes people describing that kind of stuff. So watch for yourself or watch Wendigoon's video. He talks about it because he has balls and I guess I don't. Eventually, at the end of the movie, the audience shown that it's been 572 days. This is one of the many theories, is that they're in a loophole and whatnot, but again, I'm not the best well known with those kind of theories, so you're gonna have to stick with that. And that's basically what happens in Skinamarink summarized. Definitely watch the movie if you are interested in this, or watch Wendigoon's video on it, or even watch the Dead Meat podcast where they talk about Skinamarink. They're gonna go into more detail than I am, mostly because from a storytelling perspective, it's really hard to really say what the overall ending is. Definitely watch either Dead Meat podcast or Wendigoon's video on it to really understand kind of what's happening. Now, onto the spiciest section of this video. So now to more controversial part of this video, where I'm going to be looking at people's reviews on Google and kind of debating them a little bit, just to see what other people really said, and then I'll give my final points. So let's go ahead and begin the suffering. I'm gonna make sure that I blur all the names on it. You can look at these yourselves. Don't hate on these people or anything. Be better people than that. But I'm gonna try and do this from a good context perspective of what I think. So from this person, this has got to be the most overrated movie to recently have come out. Well, why do you think that? First of all, this movie takes itself way too seriously. That's the point, is that it's supposed to be taking itself a little bit more seriously because it's about children being afraid of the dark. It tries way too hard to make a scary atmosphere. Well, it's not really trying too hard. I generally believe that this movie it's not trying the hardest to make it super scary. It's just using the ideology. Actually, why are you saying it's too hard to make it scary? It is really easy to make this atmosphere scary. Like, I did it in my skit for the beginning. That was super easy. Just set your camera up in a corner and just roll at random spots. It's easy. It's not hard. They didn't try too hard. It was the most simplest thing to do. There is way too much useless buildup. That I understand, but it's also trying to keep you on the edge of your seat. That's the point of a horror movie, is to feel that tension that something might be happening. I don't think you really understand that. There's too much useless fluff in the middle of the movie and got bored. Okay, yeah, that's plausible. The movie does take a little bit for stuff to happen. And then this goes on to the next one. Also, I'm looking at 1-star reviews on everything. All right, next rant. It's so crunchy that I can't make out the vast majority of what's recorded, except the occasional post from a hipster Snapchat story depicting a dark room illuminated by a TV. Again, watch this in the dark. You'll see everything. The point is to not really understand what is being shown, because it's bringing back some people's fear of not knowing what's in the dark. There is a system to this movie that the director wanted to do. Either watch it properly, or actually just watch the movie properly. The plot takes itself way too seriously. I wish I hadn't. Do you even know what the plot is? Like, generally, this movie doesn't really have a plot, because that's not the point. The point is to terrify people of two kids being alone in the dark with a monster trying to get them. That's the only plot that there really is. At least that's what we know. So you can't really just say that the story took itself too seriously. The main point is to make you terrified of the dark again. This movie did not serve. She's certainly unique. I agree with you that it's unique. Sure, if you don't like this type of movie, I understand that you didn't like it. But really, if you haven't watched this movie, here's some advice. Don't. Okay, why not? Instead, let me propose an alternative. Okay, I'm listening. Turn off the lights in your room. Okay, that makes sense. Turn your phone's video camera on. No flash needed. Okay. Position your arm in front of the lens so it takes up 85% of the screen. Keep it there. Okay, what's the point of that? After 30 seconds, whisper a random incoherent sentence. Continue recording for another 30 seconds and then press stop. Oh, okay, I'm starting to understand what you're trying to go through with this. Watch the video you've just made. Okay, is there anything else I need to do? Was what you just watched better than the movie? Yes, it was, because it only took a minute of your time. So you're making me look like a fool. I see. What hurts is I knew this was hot garbage 10 minutes in and turned it off, but I made the mistake of searching it on YouTube and seeing a positive buzz around it. So I gave it another chance thinking, he even needs more time to cook. God, I hate Gen Z. Maybe must be some hidden gem and these horror channels are giving it attention. Silly me, I guess. If you have ADHD watching this film, you'll have no chance to enjoy it. The sound design wasn't scary, just annoying. Please listen to all the warnings and remember that your time is valuable. You'll never get it back. This guy stole 2 hours of my life from me. Don't let it happen to you. I went into this movie seriously wanting to enjoy it, but was left disappointed. The atmosphere that the movie tries to encapsulate completely falls flat for multiple reasons. The biggest is the length. Other huge detractor is the joyous cartoon music that constantly reverberates? What the is that? Reverberate from the TV throughout the movie. The music kills the already little eeriness the movie achieves and essentially becomes an indicator letting you know that nothing will happen as long as it's playing. The only people that like this insane pile of garbage are artsy critics who are pretending this boring slog is somehow more than what it presents itself as. It is the single worst cinematic experience I have ever seen, and it left me seething by the end that I had just wasted my time watching it. If you enjoy movies where literally nothing happens, you'll love it. And I don't mean that in the sense that the story light on plot. Wait, time, pause. This dude's saying that the Emoji Movie is better than this. Are you kidding me? No. That was an utter piece of shit movie. You cannot say that this movie is worse than the Emoji Movie. No, your opinion now is forbidden.
Go back to the shadow.
Now, after looking at some reviews that are online, I wanted to talk about what I think is wrong with the movie. Mostly just gripes overall. So I will admit this movie is a tad bit too long. Not too much to where you get bored with it, but it's enough to where you kind of realize, okay, this is a little bit longer than it probably needs to be. The whole film is kind of confusing, or it can be confusing. It's just an ideology of trying to figure out what's really happening. Trying to do a deep dive into the movie is really complex and can be really confusing overall. So it's not for the fan of heart to where people who like light-minded stuff to watch this movie. It's going to be very hard for them to kind of process what's really happening. Lines can be hard to hear at some points, but that also depends on how you watch the movie. If you watch it on a TV, it's going to be a little bit harder to hear because everything's quiet. If you listen to it with headphones or anything, you're going to be able to hear it more. So that depends on how you watch it. If you're watching it with a headset or earbuds in, you're going to be able to hear everything. But on a TV with no sound system, it's just going to be really hard to listen to. The film grain can really get really annoying overall, especially if you can really process the loop of it. And same thing with the audio too. Once you kind of hear it reset and then you see the film grain loop, it kind of gets to you. You can tell that it was easily layered over everything. And then also once you find out that it's a filter, it kind of takes away from the mood of the film in a way. This is a ADHD nightmare. It's not meant for ADHD people who need something in front of their face. This movie is really slow with what it's trying to do. So people with ADHD are going to find it really hard to watch this movie and not think about wanting to do something else. So you have to really sit down and watch this movie. But if you have ADHD, it's not going to be the best watch. This movie is really only best watched in the dark. In the reviews, they were saying they couldn't see it. It's just, you need to watch this movie in the dark. It's a very specific type of movie to watch where you have to have no lights in the house on. You have to have the only thing you're listening to is the movie. The only light you can see is from the device you're watching it on. Those are the specifics to watch this movie properly, but some people don't know that. So when people watch this movie and they say they can't see anything, the point is to watch it in the dark, but people don't understand that. And then a little bit of a side thing, a lot of people really discuss this online. It's a small nitpick from me, but in the movie you actually see a lot of modern Lego pieces. I know this is a ball out of left field, but if you couldn't tell, I have one Lego set over there, but I have like more than 20 sets that are built and everything. So generally, if you know the pieces, you can see them, especially with the brick separators. I did round up all that I could find since I had basically one full of bags. I have 11 of these things. I have 11 of these. So once you understand and see that this is modern Lego, you see it like 2-3 times in the movie. So people who are deep into Lego like me, when they see it, it kind of throws off the mood because this is a newer invention for Lego and the movie takes place in the 95. Now it can be kind of cool in a kind of a cosmic way of they're somehow able to get modern pieces in the past or whatever. Timeline wise, it makes it kind of confusing, which helps with the story. But also, if you're trying to set a movie in the 90s, you kind of have to either push towards doing sets from the 90s, which is super hard because those 90s sets are extremely expensive. And I mean, getting like a random stack of Legos is just super cheap. So people have complained about some of the pieces and they figured out which set it goes to and complain about that. It kind of gets you out of the mood, especially if you are a big Lego fan. That's basically all of my complaints. I still like this movie, but it definitely has its flaws. So overall, I think this is a very unique movie. Do I like it? Yeah, for sure. I generally feel like a lot of people were expecting something else when they saw this, and they were very disappointed in what they received in the theaters, or even on Shudder. This is one of the first analog horror movies out there. There obviously are a few. Editor me put up some here, but that's a very small line of analog horror movies. So it trying to do something is very impressive. And it's very impressive that this movie had that cheap of a budget. That is roughly, don't quote me on this because I haven't been to film school. This is a very college-like budget. Of you get $10,000 for costumes, lighting, a crew, actors. So getting a movie made with that much of a budget and then seeing it in the theaters gross to $2 million is super impressive. Like, that's a lot of money that was grossed in this film, and also made Shudder a lot of money too. If you do like horror and you want to watch something different, definitely watch this movie. Watch Heck 2 on YouTube. Again, Kyle's channel is in the description and that video is also linked. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. I'm gonna be cranking out this video, and then as soon as I can crank out the next video, since I did promise in my last video that I was going to get 2 videos out in July. That second video will probably be out at the end of July, so I'll have to crank that out in my own time. If you want a small detail of what's going to be in the next video, the only thing I can say is buildings burn and people die all the time. So thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, share this video out to others who might think this is interesting, and I'll see you next time.